Be seated, everyone. We're ready to proceed. I did hear from my staff that one of the jurors was having some issues seeing because of the barrier in the way.
Good now, thank you.
All right. If that happens again, just raise your hand and we'll have it maneuvered. Unfortunately, as part of the COVID protocols, they have to be in court because I've allowed the attorneys and the defendant to proceed without wearing a mask because they're on trial and they're constantly talking and things of that nature. So because of that, we had to put those up. All right? I apologize. All right, go ahead, Mr. Blinkus.
Thank you, Judge. Dr. Simring, do you have an opinion to a degree of medical probability as to what Michael Barisone's state of mind was at the time of the incident?
Yes.
What is it, sir?
He was psychotic and out of touch with reality.
And was he delusional?
Yes. Psychotic actually means out of touch with reality. So psychotic and out of touch with reality is the same thing. There are different ways to be out of touch with reality. Specifically, he was delusional. He harbored a series of interconnected false beliefs which guided his thinking and his actions.
And what did, with those respect to those delusions, what did he believe was going to happen to him?
He believed that Lauren Kanarek and her associates had come up with an elaborate plan to destroy him and kill him.
Is there anything else with regards to your opinion? And I refer to page 18, last paragraph.
Just the second diagnosis of chronic depression, persistent depressive disorder. This has been observed by his therapist, by other people in the past, that there is an underlying depression.
Did he know the difference between right and wrong?
I'm sorry, could you...
Did he know the difference between right and wrong?
Are you talking at the time of the incident?
The time of the incident.
Time of the incident, he did not know. He thought he was acting in self-defense.
Did he understand the nature and quality of his acts?
Not clear.
Nothing further.
All right, members of the jury, before we get to cross-examination by Mr. Shellhorn, I do want to give you certain limiting instructions based on the testimony you just heard. Dr. Simring, of course, was qualified as an expert witness. You've heard that charge from me twice already. You're going to hear it again at the end when I give my final charge to you, so I'm not going to repeat it a third time now and then have to do it a fourth time. I trust you will call that charge regarding expert opinion and their ability to render their opinions based on information provided to them. And in that regard, you have heard reference to alleged statements made by the defendant in the course of the psychiatric examination by Dr. Simring. These are considered hearsay statements, but they are allowed in this circumstance. You should not consider these hearsay statements as substantive evidence relating to the guilt or innocence of the defendant or for the truth of the matter asserted by the defendant in the statement. Rather, I instruct you to consider these statements only for the limited purpose of explaining or supporting the conclusions reached by Dr. Simring or for assessing the value of the doctor's opinions that are dependent or rely on the defendant's statements. Additionally, I believe you heard a reference from the doctor with regard to the prior alleged criminal history of Lauren Kanarek and Mr. Goodwin. You have heard testimony about a background check that was done by an investigator hired by the defendant. The prior criminal history is a purported one. It's unverified. The defendant alleges that this information had an impact on his mental condition, and the testimony was only admissible and to be only considered by you for this limited purpose of explaining or supporting the conclusions reached by Dr. Simring or for assessing the value of the doctor's opinions that are dependent or rely on this information. Under our rules of evidence, a jury may consider a witness's criminal conviction in determining the credibility or believability of that witness. We are not here dealing with criminal convictions. of Ms. Kanarek or Mr. Goodwin. There are allegations of prior arrest. Those are not, under our rules, admissible with regard to the credibility of Ms. Kanarek or Mr. Goodwin, and they were not admitted for that purpose. They are only admitted because of the impact that information may have had on the state of mind of the defendant when he received and reviewed that information. That is the only reason that evidence was admissible. It is not substantive evidence of the bad character of Ms. Kanarek or Mr. Goodwin. It's not in any way admitted for that purpose and cannot be used by you in your deliberations for that purpose. The only relevance of the evidence is the extent to which you may find it affected the mental status or mental condition of the defendant. That's it. There was also testimony similarly about firearms and possession of weapons by Ms. Kanarek, referred to during Dr. Simring's testimony. Again, this information is admitted for a limited purpose, only as to the state of mind of the defendant and how it may have affected his state of mind. That information is not introduced because it may reflect in any way the bad character of Ms. Kanarek. That's not the purpose of it. All right, it's only limited information either explaining or supporting the conclusions of Dr. Simring or for assessing the value of the doctor's opinions that are dependent or relied upon that information. All right, so with those limiting instructions, I'll charge you again later at the end of the case on the limits of evidence, but I wanted to do that now before cross-examination since you have heard the testimony from Dr. Simring. All right, with that, we'll begin the cross-examination by the state.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Dr. Simring.
Good morning, Mr. Shellhorn.
Do you ever use psychological tests as part of your examination process?
Yes, but I don't perform them. If I think psychological tests are helpful, I will call upon a psychologist colleague to perform the testing.
And you'd agree with me that even when you do use a psychological test, you would never render a diagnosis based on the test?
No, I would not.
Now, you indicated on direct examination that you rendered your diagnoses using the DSM?
Correct.
I'm just going to refer to it that way. I think at this point now the jury knows what we're talking about. But you would agree that any diagnosis in the DSM would not meet any particular legal standard?
That is correct. There is, in fact, a statement in DSM at the very beginning that says it in so many words, that no diagnosis equates to any particular legal conclusion.
Would you agree with me that there's no memory disorder that's selective just for criminal behavior?
That is correct.
Now, you indicated that you diagnosed Mr. Barisone with depression disorder and delusion disorder.
Correct.
You would agree with me that depression disorder does not affect a person's ability to know right from wrong?
Well, counsel, that's a complex question. There are all kinds of levels of depression. I diagnosed him with persistent depressive disorder, which used to be called in the DSM-4 dysthymia, and prior to that used to be called minor depression or neurotic depression. It basically is a serious condition. It can lead to suicide, but it is not usually accompanied by psychosis. On the other hand, there are major depressive disorders which can involve psychosis and delusional thinking, but that's not my diagnosis.
So in this case, your diagnosis of depression would not have affected Michael Barisone's ability to know right from wrong?
That is correct. I'm sorry, not directly. I think the chronic depression made him more vulnerable to be affected by all of these events, but it would not lead directly to his ability to know right from wrong, no.
Do you recall if you ever wrote that in your report?
I don't recall that I did.
With respect to the delusional disorder that you discussed diagnosing the defendant with, you would agree that a person with delusions could know right from wrong?
Correct.
A person with delusions could understand the nature and quality of their actions?
Absolutely, anything's possible.
And I think you just testified in response to the last question from Mr. Belinkis that it's not clear whether the delusional disorder in this case affected Mr. Barisone's ability to understand the nature and quality of his actions.
Correct.
Now, I know you testified to this already, but delusional disorder is a relatively uncommon psychiatric illness.
Correct.
Some general questions, doctor. Would you agree with me that two people can have the same experience but perceive it differently?
Certainly.
You'd agree with me that someone being mistaken about something is not the same as someone having a delusion?
Yes, in fact, in the definition of delusion, one of the defining points of delusion is it's not based on simple ignorance or on cultural factors. So, just for an example, if a child believes in Santa Claus, that's not a delusion. There's no Santa Claus, but it's not a delusion because it's held within the realm of children. If a person believes in God, whether or not God exists is not the point. There is a wide variety of people who believe in God. Delusions are idiosyncratic. They're believed by the individual with little, if any, evidence, and they're held on to firmly. And the final point is the individual with the delusional disorder cannot be reasoned out of it. Simple mistake or simple ignorance will lead to conclusion. You see something and you believe that your partner is cheating you out of money, but when you're shown the books and shown the evidence, you say, oh, that's not true, I was wrong. In a delusional disorder, you could put all the evidence in the world out there. The delusional person will hang on to his or her delusion.
And I think you just used the term idiosyncratic. Can you just define kind of how you use that word for the jury?
I forgot the context in which I used it, but idiosyncratic means highly personal, that other people don't quite see it that way.
And I think you used it in the context of a delusion would be highly idiosyncratic. It would be unique to that person.
It is. Now, the content may not be, because people who have delusions often have themes which are common themes, like the theme in delusional disorder, persecutory type, the theme that you're being spied on, poisoned, in danger, set up for murder. These are common kind of themes. But each individual who's delusional will have his or her own idiosyncratic take on it.
Doctor, would you agree with me that a person feeling an emotion is not the same as a delusion?
Well, we all feel emotions, of course.
And we're not all delusional.
No, we all feel emotions, and sometimes our emotions get us into a great deal of trouble. Very common that normal people will believe that, I don't know, their girlfriend cheated on them, or their business partner cheated on them, or their driver cut them off deliberately. This is very common. They may even act on it. They may even do violence. However, in the long run, they don't persist. When they're confronted with the evidence, they will back off. Mr. Barisone would not back off despite any evidence. And despite the fact that when I mentioned before about being spied on, he was being spied on. I mean, there were cameras out there. But that's not the point. He thought that this was a plot, a multifaceted plot, all designed to bring him down.
And my question wasn't necessarily specific to Mr. Barisone. It was just a general question that a person feeling an emotion doesn't necessarily mean that they're delusional.
I would hope not. I feel emotions every day.
I hope you're not feeling any emotions with me yet, Doctor.
Only positive and admiring.
So
and I mean that genuinely.
So let me ask you some questions about the discovery that you reviewed in this case and your evaluation. You indicated that you had met with Mr. Barisone for 5 meetings?
Correct.
And the first meeting was in person, the other 4 meetings were on Zoom?
Correct.
Do you recall approximately the total number of hours that those meetings were?
It totaled a number of 6 hours in all. That's written on the first page of my report. I believe the first session was 2 hours and the others were an hour each. So that would add up to about 6.
And your first meeting with him was on September 6, 2019?
That's correct.
And then...
Which is just about exactly a month after the incident.
Almost exactly a month after
Yes.
the incident. And then your next meeting with him Can you just clarify from your report whether your next meeting was in March or April?
April, all the other meetings were in April.
Okay, so on the first page of your report where it says March 13th, that should be April 13th.
That's a typo.
Okay.
That's a typo. It should be April 6th, April 13th, April 20th, and April 27th. The reason so much time went by is I needed more discovery material. So when I had the discovery material, I broke this down into meetings.
Now, for example, after you received the discovery material, I think one of the people you said you reached out to was Ann Picardo,
Correct.
and you indicated that you were aware that she was the defendant's psychotherapist for periods off and on during the years.
Correct.
Ms. Picardo is not a doctor, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, she's not, no. She's certainly not a physician, and I'm not sure she has a PhD. And I have not seen her curriculum vitae. As far as I know, she is a psychotherapist.
Now, you didn't review all of the available discovery in the case, did you?
God forbid.
Was that because it wasn't provided to you, or because you didn't want it or need it?
I was choking on it. I told Mr. Belinkus, please stop, I've seen enough. I mean, I reach a point where you can get the pattern of things without seeing every little thing. And that really got to the whole point of Mr. Barisone's problem. He would dig up every tiny little scrap. I didn't need it and didn't want it.
Well, and I wanted to ask you in particular about witness statements. I think you indicated on direct examination that you reviewed a number of witness statements.
Correct.
Did you actually listen to the recordings of those witness statements, or did you read police reports that summarize the statements?
Read police reports and might have read a couple of actual statements, but I did not listen to tape recordings, no.
And you were aware that there were a number of people that were listed in the discovery whose statements were not summarized in police reports?
I believe that's true. I'm not absolutely sure. There were a lot of people on the farm. A lot of young people, older people on the farm.
So on the pages in your report where you talked about witness statements, starting on page 6, those would be summaries based on your impression of what a police officer wrote in their report?
Correct. For the purpose of constructing a report, it's important for me to summarize. And hopefully the summary is accurate. But in order to digest all of this kind of information, put it into a readable form, and to extract the essence of it, I will summarize things. Also, to demonstrate my understanding. So if my understanding is faulty, then you can easily see where my summary misses the point. Now, obviously, a summary doesn't cover everything. Hopefully, the summary is accurate.
So if the summary that the police officer wrote in the report was very short and didn't encompass everything that was talked about during the statement, you wouldn't know that?
That's correct. And there were also multiple police reports.
You also indicated, and I apologize, I don't know what it was marked as, but that you had reviewed some written statements from Mr. Barison?
Yes.
And I think you said that was 91 pages that he provided to you?
Well, he provided thousands of pages. And the deal I struck with Mr. Barisone, I'm putting it kindly, I told Mr. Barisone I'm not even going to look at it unless you give me the 100 top hits, because I don't want more. I don't need more. I don't want more. You know, there's such a thing as sowing confusion with too much material. So what he did is he complied, and he gave me a document which consisted of 91 pages. They're not numbered. They're basically chronological. Mr. Belinkus and I went over them, and we developed our own little Bates numbering system so that I have easy reference to them. But 91 pages, I think, fairly summarizes his concerns.
And so that would just be what Michael Barisone wanted you to know about his take on what happened within the confines that you gave him?
Well, I had everything, but I instructed him to do that. I didn't want any more. And I read enough to know how repetitive this was, that I did not need to know every single post Lauren Kanarek did, every time she used the word threat, every time she used the word multiple personality, every time she used the word, I wasn't interested in that. I'd seen so much of that I got the idea, and that I wanted him to summarize. Also, while it may be a biased summary in the sense that he chose it, it's an important bias because this is what's important to him. And in my thinking, what really mattered about the discovery is not the fact of it, but what was important to him about it. So by having him digest it, I saw what was important to him.
So if he put something into his written statement that wasn't accurate, that wouldn't matter to you?
Well, in the sum of the, no record is completely accurate, my review of the records that I saw and his summary comported with one another. And it was not really for the truth of anything. I was really saying to him, basically, go through these thousands of pages. Pick out 100 pages, the ones that most affected you. And that's what I was interested in, what most affected him. And that's what he gave me.
I guess maybe asking that question another way, would you agree that if the information you were provided was inaccurate, that could affect your diagnosis?
Anything's possible.
So, for example, you were asked on direct examination about various text messages and media documents that Mr. Barison told you about.
Yes.
And he told you that he was aware of those media posts or those text messages before the shooting incident.
Yes, he was following them avidly.
And so he was following them almost in real time, you said, in that weeks or week leading up to the shooting.
Consistently following her posts.
Now, I'm going to show you in that regard, if I may approach, Judge,
Sure.
what was referred to as Exhibit 200A-85, Doctor.
Got it.
Do you remember that post?
I think I was shown this by your adversary before. This comes under a tab, they know a war is coming.
And where it has a pink highlighter around a certain post, who put that there?
Oh, I don't know who put it there, but it says author Lauren Kanarek. This was on 7/28/19. That would have been a week before the shooting. And the text was, they know a war is coming.
And your recollection is that Michael Barisone gave you this post in particular and told you that this informed some of his mental state.
This was part of a vast number of things. I've seen that quote, and I've seen similar quotes riddled throughout these emails.
But I think your testimony on direct, correct me if I'm wrong, was that you were shown this particular text or that this was a particular one Mr. Barisone referred to.
One of them, yes.
And that's, if you would agree with me, that's on page 18,356 of the records.
18,356. That is a lot of pages.
Do you know where this post came from, Doctor?
No, it looked like, no, I think she had Instagram as well as Facebook. I don't know all the social media she used. I think her primary social media was Facebook. She texted, she used a lot of social media, but 18,000 pages is a lot of pages, even in a case like this.
Would it surprise you that this came from Facebook sent records and this came from the actual records Facebook had?
Why would that surprise me? Not at all.
Would it surprise you to know that it's in a section called private messages between account holders?
No, it wouldn't surprise me. I don't know.
So if Michael Barisone gave you this and said he relied on this posting or text message, this isn't something that would have been public at the time before the shooting.
I have no idea. This is one of 18,000 pages. Most of it's public.
And this is something, are you aware whether this is something that was turned over by the prosecutor's office to the defense in discovery?
Of 18,000 pages, I cannot account for each one of those pages. They're in evidence. I don't know anything more about that. And I certainly did not read all 18,000 pages.
I'm just trying
Nor
to
will I.
And Doctor, I'm just trying to get to the heart of Michael Barisone told you things. You didn't verify or corroborate everything that he told you.
I'm sorry, corroborate it in terms of what?
Well, you said that he told you that he relied on a number of Facebook posts.
Yes.
That informed his state of mind.
Yes.
And you said that he told you about this particular Facebook post as a post that informed his state of mind before the shooting.
One of many, many, many. Certainly, I did not believe that a war was coming.
And so what I'm asking you is, if he wasn't actually aware of this post before the shooting, does that affect your opinion about what he told you.
No, because he was aware of 17,000 other ones, which was similar. I'm just making up that number, given 18,000 on that. So
was
it's
gonna ask you that question
17,000.
next,
It's
Doctor, so-
17,000 less one. Doesn't change anything.
You were also asked about these posts, and I'm going to show you what were marked as Exhibit 200A 83,
Yes,
200A 81,
these are the manifestos.
900E6,
I've read these manifestos over and over again.
and 900E7.
Counsel, these are the manifestos.
And I'm not going to ask you to read them again unless you want to, Doctor.
Oh, please.
But you indicated that those were given to you or referred to by Mr. Barisone,
Many times.
and you referred to them as the manifestos.
Yeah, they're labeled manifesto. I'm not sure that was her word. Well, now I can't even remember any longer where this word came from. But
Do
these,
you remember when you testified on direct examination that Lauren Kanarek called those manifestos?
I think she did, but I'm not sure.
Would it surprise you to know that she never used the word manifesto in her records?
I wouldn't be surprised.
Doctor, this is probably a small detail for the purposes of what you were asked to evaluate, but on page 5 of your report, did you indicate that the police officers responded to investigate on Wednesday, August 7th, 2019 at 4:13 p.m.?
Yes, that's what I wrote.
And are you aware that the actual time that they responded was 2:13 p.m.?
It probably was a typo. There's several typos in my report.
I'm not going to go through all of them, Doctor, but staying on page 5, you would agree with me at the bottom of that page, it's talking about Mr. Goodwin and his statement,
Yes.
and that leads over onto the top of page 6 where there's a block quote of approximately 5 lines.
Yes, that actually is inappropriately attributed to Mr. Goodwin. This actually is Lieutenant Heiner's statement that came from the report.
So that's not accurate in your report.
Typo.
Now, you also reviewed a number of medical records in this case,
I did.
and those would have been Ms. Kanarek's records as well as Mr. Barisone's?
And Mr. Goodwin.
And Mr. Goodwin's. You indicated that Mr. Barisone sustained a dog bite on his left eye.
I think thigh, and I think it was in his groin area. I might have written that. As I recall it, I think it was in his groin area.
Okay. That was going to be my next question, Doctor. Is on page 9, it says he had an apparent dog bite in her left eye.
You're embarrassing with my typos.
I just wanted to make sure you were looking at the right medical records.
The right part of the body, right.
So the bite, as you recall it, was on his leg,
It was his
not
groin,
on his eye.
his groin area.
Now, you were aware, as you testified on direct, that DCP&P sent a caseworker to the property on August 7th?
Correct.
And you're aware that the caseworker was there to investigate a claim of child neglect?
That's my understanding. Child neglect or child abuse, yes.
Now, you also indicated that the report was anonymous. Were you aware from reviewing the records that it was actually a report from Safe Sport?
Later, I read that it initiated with Safe Sport, which is the sporting governing body. And I know as a fact, everybody in this profession belongs to Safe Sport. Most legitimate people belong to Safe Sport. And it's my belief that Lauren Kanarek filed a report with Safe Sport to file a report against Mr. Barisone, making more claims by the vehicle of Safe Sport. What I meant by anonymous is that the actual complainant wasn't identified as Lauren Kanarek or anybody else. It's my experience with Child Protective is they do not reveal the names of complainants. That's very common. But I do believe it was filed via Safe Sport. It's my understanding that Lauren Kanarek had reported
You don't have to
him
say
to
it again,
Safe Sport.
Doctor, thank you. But are you aware that the complaint was actually against Michael Barisone and Ms. Gray?
Yes, I think so. It's her children.
Now, you indicated earlier, I think, that you summarized some of the witness statements in your report.
I did.
And I'm going to show you one of the reports. Judge, this doesn't have an evidence sticker on it, but if I could refer to this as S-147, it is marked for identification.
Show it to counsel, please.
Doctor, I know you said there was a lot of discovery in this case, so I won't ask you if that is definitely one of the reports that you read.
Let me just see if I can readily lay my hands on that. It's a report from Morris County Prosecutor's Office by Sasha Gold. I do remember that name. And I did review that report, yes.
And Doctor, I'm going to refer you to...
It's Sasha Gould. There were two Goulds investigators, so I remember this is Sasha Gould. There was a male Gould as well.
That's right. And Doctor, I'm going to refer you to page 5 of that report.
Right.
Approximately, I would say 2/3 to 3/4 of the way down. It's actually the third paragraph from the bottom that starts with Gray stated that on today's date.
Yes.
And do you see the sentence that says it was learned that someone from her house reported allegations of abuse against Gray's children by Barison?
Correct.
And this is in reference to Detective Gould's summary of her interview with Ms. Mary Haskins Gray?
Correct.
And you relied on that summary in formulating or adding information to your report?
Well, just a moment. You said this? Yes, that's right. This report by Investigator Gould, she spoke to both Mr. Barisone and Ms. Gray. This statement specifically relates to Ms. Gray. I just want to identify the statement. So could you repeat your question?
Sure. And just before we do that, you just said that Detective Gould interviewed Mr. Barisone and Ms. Gray, but I think you meant she interviewed Mr. Goodwin.
Mr. Goodwin, I meant. Sorry. Mr. Goodwin. Right, Mr. Goodwin and Ms. Gray.
So the sentence I was referring to was, it was learned that someone from her house reported allegations of abuse against Gray's children by Barison.
Yes.
And then if I direct your attention to your report, page 8, and I'll refer to your report as S-423. I think it's the same as the one the defendant marked.
Yes. I have it.
Page 8
Of my report.
of your report. Doctor.
Yes, I have it.
And does the very last full sentence on that page say, it was learned that someone had reported allegations of sexual abuse against Ms. Gray's children by Mr. Barison?
Correct.
So you'd agree with me, the only difference between the sentence you wrote in your report about Ms. Gray's interview and the sentence that Sasha Gould wrote in her report about Ms. Gray's interview is that you added the word sexual before abuse.
Oh, yes, this does not say sexual. I think that came from something else, but I don't remember. This does not say sexual here.
So, beginning on
When you say
page-
this doesn't say sexual, what are you referring to?
Your Honor, the statement by Investigator Gould that I was quoting
All right.
said abuse, does not say sexual abuse.
Okay.
So when you indicated earlier that you summarized certain witness statements in your report, I think you said that that was to give your understanding of what some of the witnesses said as it may have pertained to your ultimate opinions?
Yes, correct. It allows you to point out the error that she did not say sexual. So I laid out my understanding, which in terms of the word sexual was not correct.
So you added the word sexual into your report, where Ms. Gray never said that in her statement.
I don't know if she ever said it or never said it, but that doesn't appear in that particular statement, and I did not add it deliberately.
And that's because you never listened to her statement or watched her statement.
Correct.
So you added it perhaps inadvertently, I guess you're saying, based on something else you saw in the case?
I think so, yes.
In fact, in those written statements of Michael Barisone, does he continually say that the DCP&P was there for something related to sexual abuse?
I think so.
So Michael Barisone told you in his written statement, or wrote in his written statement, that the worker was there to investigate sexual abuse, and then you adopted that in your report?
Not really. It's my experience, Counselor, in working with DIFAS over many years, now DCP&P, is that they provide minimal information. And they will just simply say a complaint has been filed. They won't say by whom. They often don't even say the type of complaint. And I don't know why sexual crept into this. It certainly doesn't reflect what Investigator Gould said. It does reflect what Barisone said. I really don't know the answer to that. But I do know that some kind of complaint was filed, and I don't know who initiated it. It came via the Sport Safe professional organization, but I don't know who initiated it. Mr. Barisone assumed that it was Lauren Kanarek with one more attack against him, but I have no way of knowing that.
And I think you said you don't know where that word sexual or where the sexual abuse came from, why it got inserted here.
Correct.
But you would agree with me, based on what we just discussed, the Division of Child Protection and Permanency, DCP&P, was not there to investigate sexual abuse.
I don't know. I'd have to go through this again, maybe in the break, and see the statements that came directly from the investigator, if there was a statement directly from the investigator. I'm not sure I saw anything from the investigator.
What if I told you that that investigator testified in court earlier in this trial and said that she was not there to investigate sexual abuse?
I will accept that assertion.
Would you also accept the representation that the Sikh Sport records of the initial complaint do not reference sexual abuse?
If that's your assertion, I will accept it.
So where you indicated that you didn't know where the word sexual came from, you're also acknowledging that that is in the defendant's written statements that he gave to you.
Correct, and I might have conflated it in doing my summary of the report. This is really, as I explained, one of the reasons I lay out my summary, so that if I am in error of anything, it can easily be picked up by you on cross-examination.
So you're putting things that are intentionally wrong into your report so I can catch them on cross-examination?
Beg pardon?
Is that what you just said?
That's one of the most bizarre things I've ever been asked. No, I lay out my thinking so that you have the opportunity to examine the basis of my report and to question me if I'm in error about one of the bases, as you have here. I'm not trying to trick you.
And I'm not trying to trick you either, Doctor. Now, you indicated in your report on page 14 that Michael Barisone told you the last thing he remembers is information from the social worker.
Correct.
Do you recall in that written statement that he gave you, the 91 pages, that he said that there were 2 or 3 images, blurry at best, until being unloaded from the ambulance at Morristown?
If you direct me to the page.
Sure, Doctor. I have it marked as the very last page in those writings.
Okay.
And just so the record is clear, I'm referring to what I've marked as S440 for identification.
I have it. I call it page 91.
And Doctor, I'm specifically looking at the end of that paragraph, and you would agree with me, page 91 is the last page Michael Barisone wrote that he gave to you.
In that so-called 100-page packet, which actually were 91 pages. Yes, what it says is, the last 2 images I saw before the lights went out.
It's actually before that, Doctor, what I'm referring to, where it says, I remember being at my desk, I have 2 or 3 images, blurry at best, until being unloaded from an ambulance at Morristown.
Yes, I have I remember being at my desk. I have to, yes.
Did you ask him what those 2 or 3 images that he remembered about the incident were?
I did, and I have a red X over that, which is my notation for meaning he could provide no further information. On that particular 4 sentences, I placed a red X when I go through a statement, which means he could provide nothing else.
So you did ask him, and he responded he didn't remember what that meant.
Correct.
And that's not in your report. I don't think I missed that, correct?
I didn't have these 91 pages. I had 18,000 pages when I did my report, and I've already told you I did not read all 18,000 pages.
I'm sorry, doctor, maybe that wasn't clear. You didn't indicate in your report that you asked him the question specifically about the 2 or 3 things that he remembered that were blurry and he couldn't remember.
Correct.
You would agree with me that a person who is feigning amnesia may spontaneously confess to something?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. You would agree with me that someone who's feigning amnesia may spontaneously confess?
Anything can happen. If the word you're saying is may, anything may happen.
And I'm specifically referencing in the DSM where it talks about feigning amnesia. Doesn't it indicate that an individual who's feigning amnesia may spontaneously confess?
Sure, that can happen.
And these statements that Mr. Barisone wrote that you indicated you relied on, were you with him when he wrote those?
I was not.
Do you recall approximately when you asked for those to be written?
It was sometime after my last interview in April of 2020 when I told Mr. Belinkus that I had so much material that I insisted that he ask his client to prepare a digest for me.
So you asked him to write those after your last interview with him?
Correct, and I said no more than 100 pages. And when he protested, I said no more than 100 pages. If there's anything more than 100 pages, I'm not going to read it.
Do you recall approximately when those 91 pages were produced to you?
Sometime after my last interview in April of 2020.
And you just indicated that after you got those, you reviewed them?
Yes.
And you indicated that at least with respect to the comment about 2 to 3 images that were blurry in his mind, you asked him about those and he didn't remember them.
All I have is an X here. I underlined many things. I do that in red. When I do an interview, I had an X here, which meant he gave me no further information.
So you interviewed him or examined him again after that last meeting of April that's listed in your report?
That's a good question. I did not. That may have come, I might have put that together with some of the original material that he submitted.
So it's possible you didn't ask him about the 2 to 3 parts of the event that he did remember, even if they were blurry?
It's certainly possible, yes.
Doctor, moving on to your diagnosis, specifically the diagnosis for delusional disorder. I think you indicated that a delusion is a false belief.
Yes, a false belief, not based on simple ignorance, not held by any particular culture or subculture, and not amenable to reasonable change.
Did you define the term delusion in your report at all?
I said, probably I did. Starts with false belief, but with those caveats. Yes, on page 18 of my report, this is in the summary section, where I wrote, delusional disorder is a relatively uncommon but severe psychiatric illness. The disorder involves psychotic thinking and a break with reality. That's the same thing, psychotic thinking and a break with reality. Delusional disorder is related to schizophrenia, which is a much more common condition. In schizophrenia, the individual displays a wide range of serious symptoms, including hallucinations, agitation, disordered thought process, and delusions. However, I'm adding, In delusional disorder, the major symptoms involve delusions, not these other things. So in schizophrenia, you have a grab bag full of serious symptoms. In delusional disorder, you just have the delusions. So it's a part of schizophrenia.
Now you
Well,
you
I'm not
indicated-
finished.
Well, and my question was just
Therefore-
what, and Doctor, my question was just whether you defined it, and I think you did answer that.
Well, I haven't finished the definition.
I didn't ask you to define it. I asked you if you did define it.
Yes, and I was reading you my definition.
Okay, I didn't ask for that.
Okay.
Thank you, Doctor. What in particular is Michael Barisone's specific delusion?
That Lauren Kanarek is bound and determined to destroy him and kill him.
When did that delusion start?
I can't say exactly, probably in the summer of 2019.
And what specific evidence do you rely on to show that that was the onset of the delusion that Lauren Kanarek was, I don't want to paraphrase, I'm sorry, I didn't get the exact words you used.
Well, the posts and his deteriorating mental state. And their deteriorating relationship.
So potentially the posts that Michael Barisone told you about when you met with him,
Correct.
some of which we've established he didn't have before the shooting.
Judge, one, not some.
Yeah, you're just one.
Well, I only addressed one, Judge.
Right, well,
Do you have
but
to
if
be
you
honest?
if you have others, then you can address them. But you only addressed one.
I didn't go through them all on the break, to be candid, Judge.
Well, I understand. But what you did go through, what's on the record, is one.
So, Doctor, my question was, you indicated that you based your opinion about the onset of the delusions and the delusional diagnosis on the existence of these social media or Facebook posts.
Well, yes, on the deteriorating relationship between Kanarek and Barison, the things they were saying to each other, and particularly and primarily on these posts and texts.
And you didn't indicate in your report specifically when you determined the onset of the delusions.
I think I mentioned in the report that it started somewhere in 2019. I think after she returned from the farm in Florida and moved back to the farm in New Jersey. They had had normal problems before that time, he said, normal landlord-tenant type problems. But after she returned, things took a decided turn for the worse.
So if I'm reading your report right, are you talking about on page 16 where you indicate Mr. Barisone's relationship with Lauren Kanarek and her family began to quickly deteriorate in the spring of 2019?
Correct.
So you wrote that there because you determined that the delusions began then?
Well, they never begin at one particular time. Delusions develop. And if you look at the history of a delusion and you go backward in time, what you'll usually find are suspicions and distrust and feelings about bad will. These are all within the normal intercourse between people. But then they get more out of hand and the ideas become less and less plausible and more eccentric and more idiosyncratic. I think that by the time spring of 2019, Lauren Kanarek started saying things which were unmoored from reality, unmoored from what was actually happening. And Michael Barisone was more and more believing the things that she was saying.
And you'd agree with me that the criteria or symptom for delusional disorder would be that the delusion has existed for a period of 1 month or longer.
Correct.
And so what you're saying today is even though you didn't determine specifically whether it was before a month before the shooting, that's your opinion that it did exist before.
Yes, it's somewhere in the spring of 2019. It's very hard to put a specific date on it, but the reason the DSM puts that proviso in is it's to rule out an instance where somebody suddenly claims that all of a sudden today I became delusional about you. That's not the way the disorder happens. It percolates and develops over time. So this is a very typical development of a delusional disorder over time.
Doctor, you testified on direct examination that Mr. Barisone was depressed and preoccupied with Ms. Kanarek,
Correct.
and you based that in part on review of the various Facebook posts and social media posts that he told you that he was reviewing?
Well, that, statements by other witnesses, Ms. Picardo, Mr. Tarshis, Mary Gray Haskins, Ruth Cox, some of the young people on the farm, Justin Harden. I can't name all of them, but there were a lot of people who were interviewed who were seeing the same thing and felt helpless to do anything about it. Everybody seemed to see a train wreck coming, but nobody seemed to know what to do about it.
And they were all preoccupied with what was going on here between themselves and Ms. Kanarek.
Oh,
as
not the
well.
way he was. They were concerned. That's small potatoes. They were concerned. I'm concerned about a lot of things. I'm sure you're concerned about a lot of things. That's not the same as preoccupied. Preoccupied is having a thought in your head that you cannot get out of your head no matter what. That's a delusion.
So if some of those witnesses, let's say, had testified that they were terrified, or that they were scared, or that they were preoccupied with everything going on, does that mean they were delusional too?
No, it depends. They were certainly preoccupied and frightened because the farm was falling apart. This is their place of residence and their place of employment, and they were all dedicated very strongly to a sport in which they shared a common love. And they also shared a great deal of affection for Michael Barison. That came out. They saw everything unraveling in front of their eyes and felt helpless to do anything about it. This had to do with Mary Haskins Gray and Ruth Cox, and I think that's one of the reasons Ruth Cox came to visit. I don't remember exactly. Had to do with Stephen Tarshis, had to do with Justin Harden. People saw from their point of view that things were going very badly, and they did not know how to intervene.
Now, you didn't review all of their statements.
Counselor, I would still be in my office today if I were reviewing every one of the statements. I took what I thought was a fair sampling.
So if somebody said something different than what you just testified to, that could affect your opinion.
It has to do with the overall thing. If one kid on the farm said, gee, things look pretty happy, that's not going to change the overwhelming weight of evidence.
What if all of the people felt the same way and expressed their concerns the same way that Michael Barison did?
Well, if
You're
everybody...
saying that their own fears or
If
their
each-
preoccupations were somehow less than Michael Barison's?
Well, this is sort of a hypothetical thing, but if you're saying if Justin Harden said, I felt personally threatened that she was going to kill me, if Stephen Tarshis, attorney, said, I was personally threatened that she was going to kill me, well, that might be different, but nobody said anything like that. They were concerned about Barison's welfare. There wasn't anybody else there that felt personally and directly threatened by Kanarek and Goodwin.
Based on your review of what you did review?
That's all I have. And
You
my
were given
interviews.
everything, correct?
I was given more than everything.
You had access to everything. And you chose not
God
to look
help
at
me,
it.
yes, I had access to 18,000 pages. And it isn't just a question of reading 18,000 pages and writing a bill for 18,000 pages. I'm not going to do that. It's not necessary. In doing a review of medical records, it's not necessary to do each one. Things become very duplicative. And after a point, especially when you're experienced in reading records, as I think I am, a pattern emerges. Now, that doesn't mean that on Tuesday, one day, somebody said things look pretty good. That wouldn't change anything. The overall picture was clear. People on the farm were concerned about the welfare of Michael Barison. They saw the man they really cared for deteriorating, but they were not concerned about their personal safety. It was only Barison who was afraid that Lauren Kanarek was going to kill him.
He was the only one that was afraid.
Correct. That he was going to be killed by Kanarek.
Now, moving on to the question I had about some of the information that Mr. Barisone was collecting. You indicated that he produced
I'm sorry. It's about, I know we started a little bit late today, so I wanted to go a little bit over, but If you're gonna
I think
finish
now
up
is a good
within
time,
5
Judge.
minutes
Now is a
or
good
10 minutes, I'll continue. But if it's gonna be longer, I wanna give the jury their
How much longer?
fairly
Now's a
regular.
good time, Judge.
Yeah, all right.
I'm getting hungry, Lauren.
All right, well, that cinches it then, Doctor. We'll break for lunch.
Thank you.
All right, very good. Enjoy your lunch, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you around 20 of 2. Doctor, if you can leave all your papers in.